is that under modern Hong Kong?
Certainly, the new laws that were implemented after the protests in 2019 have changed the landscape for criticism of the government, whether that's criticism of the Hong Kong government or criticism of the central government in Beijing. And the charge specifically relates to his dealings with what they call foreign forces, which is basically foreign governments, members of parliaments, think tanks overseas. And there were a lot of people from Hong Kong, prominent people involved in the pro democracy movement, who were calling for foreign governments to impose sanctions on Hong Kong as a result of the protests and the aftermath of those protests that occurred in 2019. This is not something that was a crime previously. So previously, a pro-democracy politician or an NGO activist, scholar in Hong Kong could interact with foreign politicians or foreign think tanks. They could even call for punishments against or sanctions against the Hong Kong government without criminal liability. But now, with these new laws, there is criminal liability for those kinds of actions. Now Mr. Lai denies that his interactions with those foreign persons or organizations or governments has violated the new law. And the court is going to issue its decision on Monday, but we have to be frank. It would be very surprising if the court found him not guilty.
And Ross, if Lai is convicted, does that formally end the idea of one country, two systems in anything but name?
The Hong Kong government would vehemently disagree with that suggestion, but again, it's clear that the space for politics, and specifically for criticism of the government, whether that's criticism of the Hong Kong government or the central government, has shrunk, and that it's changed significantly. And I think Hong Kong government officials would have to acknowledge that as well. I mean, they would say that there still is a space to do that. But there is legal liability for how people go about doing that did not exist previously. And that's just the reality. So yes, many people would say one country, two systems has changed or doesn't even exist anymore.
Ross, do stay with us once again as we have further updates coming out of the Indo-Pacific next. Two exiled democracy activists wanted by Hong Kong say that police in Australia and Britain are investigating fake sexualized images used to target them in a campaign of harassment. Former Hong Kong lawmaker Ted Hui, who was granted asylum in Australia, says that Australian authorities are investigating a sexualized poster depicting his wife and letters with false claims about him that were sent to Australian addresses earlier this year. And Carmen Lau, who lives in Britain, says her local Member of Parliament, Joshua Reynolds, alerted her to fake sexually explicit images of her that had been distributed to her neighbours. Hui and Lau are among 34 pro-democracy campaigners for whom the Hong Kong authorities last year offered a $130,000 bounty, accusing them of violating the city's national security laws. Ross joins us once again. Ross, is this a clear case of transnational repression linked to Hong Kong authorities?
The challenge there, and yeah, many people will say that it is an example of transnational repression. The challenge is finding a direct link between the government of Hong Kong and the people who are behind these activities. And we'll see if the relevant police agencies are able to establish that proof. Now, it might just be people acting at their own initiative because they feel a need to support the government. They dislike critics of the government, especially critics who are in exile, where they have a platform to say what they want about Hong Kong's government or China's government in Beijing. So who exactly is behind this? remains to be seen. But obviously, in democratic societies, whether it's the UK, the US, or Australia, Canada, places where people from Hong Kong have relocated to, this is considered not just inappropriate, but often illegal. So if the perpetrators can be found, they're very likely to face criminal charges.
Yeah, and Ross, of course, there was a $130,000 bounty put on the individuals previously. However, seems to have moved on to some sort of psychological and reputational warfare. Have governments used this sort of method in the past, particularly coming from Hong Kong and that overall region?
China certainly has a long history of going after its critics using various methods. Sometimes just trying to persuade them. They've been accused of harassing or even detaining relatives who are in China. But there's certainly other examples of countries around the world, authoritarian governments using these kinds of methods to go after their critics who are in exile. The bounty gets a lot of media attention, but realistically, it's not like I mean, hopefully, it's not like these people are going to be kidnapped and someone's going to produce them in Hong Kong and collect a bounty. But at the same time, however unrealistic it is that they get extradited or kidnapped to Hong Kong, there is this ongoing issue where they are being harassed, and it is important for investigators to find out who is behind this and take necessary action, because this behavior really is, as I said, it's not just inappropriate, but often cases it is actually illegal, and that should never be tolerated in democratic societies.
Yes, Ross Feingold, thank you very much for joining us here on NewsX World. It's always a pleasure to talk to you. We now move on, and a drone attack on a United Nations base in the Abyei region of Sudan has reportedly killed at least 6 Bangladeshi peacekeepers and injured 8 others. According to the Bangladeshi army, the situation in the area still remains unstable, but the authorities are doing everything in their capacity to provide medical treatment and rescue operations to those injured. Bangladesh is one of the largest contributors to UN peacekeeping missions. Its troops have long been deployed in Abyei, which again is known to be a highly volatile region and constantly a matter of dispute between Sudan and South Sudan. Joining us now to discuss this is Ambassador Suresh Goel, a former diplomat joining us live from New Delhi. Thank you very much for joining us, Ambassador Goel. The severity of this situation, of course, UN peacekeepers, 6 of which have been killed in Sudan. Can you expect any repercussions for such an act?
It's slightly more complex than just repercussions here, really. Normally what happens is that the peacekeepers, I mean, and I'm speaking about, I was there with the United Nations a long time ago, from 91 onwards, dealing with the United Nations peacekeeping operations. And normally the peacekeeping operations were of a non-military nature, in the sense that they would not militarily intervene in the dispute between the two sides, but their very presence would actually keep the disputing parties away from each other. Slowly, they have basically become more military operations. Somalia comes to mind immediately. Umprofol, you got same thing happen. Now, in the case of Sudan, the peacekeeping operations have the mandate to basically stop the fighting between the troops from Sudan and South Sudan, particularly in the Abyei region, where the situation is volatile and it's challenging. But the military action was expected, that there could be challenges to the peacekeepers and there could be fatalities of the peacekeeping operations. It's unfortunate because this does bring to attention that the situation in South Sudan is not so simple, and that just a military intervention is not going to stop it. I think the death of the Bangladeshi peacekeeping operation just highlights the fragility of the operation itself. And the what's going to happen is that, as usual, There would be discussions in the Security Council on the peacekeeping operations and what further action needs to be taken by the United Nations itself. The operation would continue. It had been renewed only recently, but I think there would be renewed efforts by the United Nations to bring the two sides to talk to each other to stop the military hostility. Yes.
Yeah,
So,
and Bangladesh is one of the largest UN contributors. Given 6 Bangladeshi nationals were killed, do you think this tragedy will change the political calculus in Dhaka?
uh, when countries contribute peacekeeping operations, they carefully weigh the possibilities of such injuries to life and the personnel of the peacekeeping operations. They carefully weigh the options. If Bangladesh has contributed peacekeepers to this operation, they would have done so after knowing the implications. Therefore, my own expectation is, or my assessment is, that it will not change Bangladeshi participation in the peacekeeping operations, but they would basically weigh very carefully as to the kind of military action that the peacekeepers should be prepared for, of course, under the mandate of the United Nations. But changing the calculus of participation, no.
Ambassador Suresh Goel, thank you very much for joining us here on News 6 World. It's always a pleasure to have you. We now move on, and China and the United Arab Emirates have moved to strengthen bilateral ties, with Chinese Foreign Minister Wang Yi holding talks with his UAE counterpart in Abu Dhabi on Friday. The meeting took place as part of Wang's 3-nation tour of the Middle East, which began the same day. According to China's foreign ministry, discussions focused on expanding cooperation across key sectors, including investment, oil and gas, and infrastructure development. Wang Yi emphasized Beijing's willingness to boost high-level exchanges with the UAE, deepen political mutual trust, and further elevate bilateral relations. The talks highlight China's growing engagement with Gulf nations as it looks to strengthen strategic and economic partnerships across the Middle East. China has achieved a major milestone in offshore energy development as the secondary development project of the Liuhua oil field has fully commenced operations. The announcement was made by the China National Offshore Oil Corporation on Sunday. Liuhua is China's first deep water oil field and is located in the Pearl River mouth basin. It is also the country's largest offshore reef limestone oil field by proven geological reserves. Since beginning production in 1996, the field has already produced more than 20 million tons of crude oil. Now, despite this, an estimated 140 million tons of reserves remain trapped in deep seabed strata, prompting the launch of the second phase development. The project covers the Liuhua 11-1 and Liuhua 4-1 oil fields, with 32 production wells operating at an average depth of 305 meters. Since initial wells came online in September of 2024, daily output has surged to a record 3,900 tons. And that's a wrap on the China report for today. Keep watching News X World for more international updates.
in the midst of this, life persists. In the midst of untruth, truth persists.
Hello and welcome, I'm Thomas Porteous and you're watching the World Report on NewsX World. Let's take a look at some of the top headlines coming out of the hour. Thailand says 4 soldiers are killed in renewed clashes with Cambodia at the disputed border, bringing the death toll to 14 since fighting began this week. The Prime Minister vows to continue military actions despite a US claim that a ceasefire has been agreed. President Donald Trump's envoy Steve Witkoff travels to Germany to meet Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky and European leaders for talks on ending the war in Ukraine. The Trump administration pushes for a peace deal by Christmas, though recent talks with Ukraine and Russia show little sign of a breakthrough. Devastating floods and landslides in Indonesia kill more than 1,000 people, with the worst damage in Sumatra, rescuers say. Authorities report 1,003 dead and over 200 missing as emergency teams struggle to reach affected areas. 2 people are killed and others injured after a Ukrainian drone strike hit a residential building in the Russian city of Saratov, regional officials have said. The governor says the overnight attack caused casualties and damage, with no immediate details on the extent of injuries. Over the border, Ukraine says Russia uses drones and missiles to strike 2 ports, damaging 3 Turkish-owned vessels, including a ship carrying food supplies. The attack follows Moscow's pledge to retaliate for Kiev's maritime drone strikes on Russian tankers. The Philippine Coast Guard says 3 Filipino fishermen are wounded and 2 boats damaged after Chinese Coast Guard ships fire water cannons at a disputed South China Sea shoal. Officials say multiple Filipino vessels are blocked and anchor lines cut near Sabina Shoal, putting crews at risk. Storm sweeps across the Gaza Strip, killing at least 14 people and injuring others, according to Gaza's Interior Ministry. Officials say strong winds, heavy rain and collapsing structures hit families already displaced by Israel's assault. Iranian authorities detain 18 crew members of a foreign tanker seized in the Gulf of Oman, saying it carries 6 million litres of smuggled fuel. State media reports the detained includes the captain with crew members from India, Sri Lanka and Bangladesh. We start in Europe, and Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdogan says that he intends to discuss his Ukraine-Russia peace initiative with US President Donald Trump following recent talks with Russian President Vladimir Putin. Erdogan made his proposal during a meeting with Putin in Turkmenistan focused on a limited ceasefire targeting energy facilities and ports as a potential first step towards a broader settlement. The Turkish president also reiterated his offer for Istanbul to serve as the venue for a wider range of peace negotiations. Erdogan and Putin met on the margins of the International Peace and Trust Forum in Turkmenistan's capital and discussed the bilateral ties and comprehensive peace efforts regarding the Moscow-Kiev war. Joining us now is Ben Aries. He's a Russian journalist. He joins us live from Berlin. Thank you very much, Ben, for joining us here on NewsX World. It's a pleasure to have you. Erdogan here, he's saying that he hopes to discuss a Ukraine peace plan with Trump after meeting Vladimir Putin last week. Is Turkey positioning itself as a mediator here or as Moscow's preferred channel to Washington? And of course, today in Odessa's port, 3 Turkish vessels were hit by this drones. How might this affect this relationship?
Absolutely. Turkey's played a key role in this conflict as a mediator. It has good relationships with Russia. It's refused to get on board with the sanctions regime in general, and has been a major entry port for goods that used to go directly into Moscow. Now they're being channeled through Turkey. And at the same time, it's a NATO member. It has relations, reasonably good relations with the rest of Europe and the States. And a lot of the key deals, peace deals, agreements that have been struck during the war have happened in Istanbul, starting with the failed peace talks in April 2022 and the successful Black Sea grain deal, which allowed Ukraine to restart its grain exports. And Erdogan, he sees Putin regularly, he's offering to mediate between the two sides, and he's actually in a very good position to do that. As for but at the same time, like, Turkey's getting drawn into this war in so much as the Black Sea is very key for Turkey. A lot of its trade goes through there. And recently, both the Russians and the Ukrainians have started to strike oil tankers that are sailing through the Black Sea, affecting Turkey directly. And the incident you just mentioned was that Putin promised not to interfere with Black Sea shipping. Nevertheless, at the weekend, struck 3 Turkish oil tankers that were imports in Ukraine in order to prevent supplies of fuel reaching Ukraine as one of his war goals. And so there's a tension there, definitely. And that only motivates Erdogan even more to actually play a real role in bringing this war to an end, because it's affecting Turkey's economy, Turkey's security.
Yes, and Ben, of course, another huge diplomatic update today. Steve Witkoff is in Berlin to meet President Volodymyr Zelensky and European leaders for a latest round of high-level talks. Ukraine and Europe are demanding these US security guarantees before any potential territorial concessions. Do you think Trump is likely to offer that, or push Europe to shoulder that burden?
It's already gone much further than I ever could have hoped for, in so much as that within the original 28-point plan, which is now 27 points, the US said explicitly that it was going to offer some sort of security guarantee. And then we saw a draft version of the leaked version of the American proposal, and that is NATO Article 5-like guarantees. It's a 10-year deal that also commits the US to possibly coming in with troops on the ground in Ukraine should Russia really invade once there's a peace deal. And that's more than anybody's offered. Again, there were comments coming out of the White House. They were saying, look, we're not going to offer a blank check, but in the form of Article 5 NATO, but we are going to do a quote-unquote real deal. And that's all about providing military support. So that's what Ukraine needs. That's what Zelensky has been demanding since the beginning. And ironically, the EU has talked about security deals, but it doesn't include that key military component. There's no collective military security coming from the EU. And Zelensky cannot do a peace deal without a real security deal, because he's thinking about protecting the sovereignty of the country after the war is over, and ensuring that Russia doesn't come back, put troops on the border again, pressure it, threaten to invade. And if he has the backing of his Western allies, particularly the States, with a military commitment, then Russia will not invade for a second time, because that means Third World War. And so this is very encouraging. As for the US booting it off to the EU, I think it's the other way around. The US has actually stood up and made a commitment, and the EU is still dithering. And
Ben, Trump has proposed this free economic zone in the eastern Donbass region. Is this a pragmatic compromise or a de facto acceptance here of frozen conflict?
Well, what's going on is the Donbass, who owns it and who has sovereignty over it, is a Putin must-have. And the issue is that Zelensky has refused to give up any territory at all. And so they're coming up now with various versions of how they can fudge that. So one suggestion was to set up a Korean-style DMZ, demilitarized zone, which excludes all of the troops, particularly Russian, including Ukrainian, would have to leave, which is a Putin demand. But it leaves the sovereignty over that region, sort of fudged up in the air. It's not clear. And that's not gone down particularly well. It's in play. And this free economic zone is basically another version of the same thing. It's like, how do you get all the troops out of that region? And at the same time, for the Ukrainian side, they don't want to concede that it's Russian sovereign, but they will maybe concede it's de facto controlled by Russia. And Putin, on his side, is insisting that it's sovereign, but trying to find some formula where he's going to say, okay, that's close enough. And this free economic zone is the latest is offer. But this whole negotiation for peace now turns on those two questions, on the security guarantee and the territories, and how they're, what happens to them after the ceasefire.
Ben Iris, thank you very much for joining us here on NewsX World. Pleasure to have you on the programme, and thank you for taking the time. We now move over for our next update from Southeast Asia, and Thailand has denied US President Donald Trump's claim that a truce with Cambodia was agreed during a recent phone call as fighting along the border entered its 6th day. Thai Prime Minister Paetongtarn Shinawatra has said that she has urged President Trump to ask Cambodia to halt hostilities, saying that Thailand was not the aggressor and had a duty to protect its sovereignty and its people. She added that Trump was concerned about the fighting and warned both sides to return to a ceasefire, describing the call as taking place in a good atmosphere. The Thai leader also said that she did not believe Washington could link the conflict to trade tariffs. However, Thailand's Foreign Minister Sihac Phumthepsaikau said Trump's public remarks suggesting a truce had been reached did not reflect an accurate understanding of the situation on the ground. Let's take a listen in.
We're concerned because some of the points in his tweet doesn't, in our view, doesn't reflect an accurate understanding of the situation, and some of the points are inconsistent with the facts. Perhaps President Trump, the source of information, had deliberately distorted the facts. We regret and we're disappointed that some of the points made by President Trump has bearing upon the feeling of the Thai people, Thailand, because we consider ourselves, we are proud, in fact, and to be the oldest treaty ally of the United States.
Residents near the Thai-Cambodian border report that clashes have continued despite the phone call, underscoring the fragile security situation and the lack of a confirmed ceasefire between the two neighbours. Apologies, there was an error in the read. The Thai Prime Minister is Onortin Shanvirakul. Okay, joining us now is Ross Feingold. He is a political analyst. He joins us live from Taipei in Taiwan. Ross, pleasure to have you on the programme. This fighting entering its 6th day and a denial from Thai leadership that fighting will be stopped. Its Prime Minister says that President Trump is unlikely to link these conflicts to these trade tariffs. Does that reflect greater confidence here in dealing with the White House?
It might be more for domestic consumption within Thailand, especially now that Parliament has just been dissolved and an election is upcoming. So the ruling party certainly wants to maintain its leadership of government, and they have to confront public anger. And just like in Cambodia, there's public anger at the Thais, and in Thailand, there's public anger at the Cambodians. But we have to keep in mind that there will, just like a few months ago when this first flared up, there will be tremendous pressure both from the United States as well as from other ASEAN members, including the outgoing chairman Anwar Ibrahim, Prime Minister of Malaysia, who was very involved earlier this year in bringing about a ceasefire. He's involved at the moment, and President Trump specifically mentioned Anwar Ibrahim's role in this. And then the incoming chairman of ASEAN, President Marcos of the Philippines, will probably be involved as well. And then also China is a stakeholder, and they'll certainly be putting pressure on both sides as well. So I don't think that Thailand or Cambodia is immune from U.S. pressure, and U.S. pressure will be a significant factor here. Granted, the foreign minister's words were unusually direct in its criticism or refuting what the U.S. Has said, and we don't see that a lot around the world, actually. But I would, again, I think that Thailand and Cambodia are going to be under significant pressure from the U.S. To bring this to a very quick halt.
Yeah, and Ross, Thai leaders say and insist that they are not the aggressors, yet residents say fighting continues. Is this situation slipping beyond political control?
It remains to be seen. Of course, nobody wants to see these two neighbors engaged in a hot war. The scope at the moment, however tragic and disruptive it is for the civilians who are affected, the scope remains relatively small at the moment. So I think it's fair to say that the militaries are still responding to the civilian leadership. That being said, neither side wants to back down or be seen as having admitted defeat, which also makes it difficult to achieve a ceasefire unless they just go back to the status quo, which is kind of what President Trump and Prime Minister Anwar had been seeking throughout the last few months anyway. So the way out probably would be to go back to the status quo before fighting flared up. But again, neither side wants to be seen as having given something up. And that also factors into how quickly a ceasefire could be arranged.
Ross, a lot of analysts say that the root issues of this conflict are not being addressed. It is, after all, been a decades-long dispute. What's stopping that from happening? What's stopping these deep-rooted territorial issues and others from being addressed? Do you think the United States isn't taking this conflict serious enough?
To be fair to the U.S., I think the Trump administration has been pretty involved ever since fighting began earlier this year, whether that's Secretary Rubio, the frontline diplomats, or President Trump himself. But you're correct, this is a dispute over a relatively small amount of territory, but it is a dispute with a very long history. That being said, the ties between the two countries, commercial, cultural, are very, very strong. For example, it's been well reported how many Cambodians were working in Thailand before the fighting began, and many of them felt they had to leave Thailand because it was no longer safe to be a Cambodian working in Thailand. So the countries actually have, other than this dispute, a generally strong relationship in recent decades after the end of the Cold War. And despite many changes of governments in Thailand over the last few decades, Cambodia in that sense has benefited, despite criticisms of how it conducts its elections, but they basically have had two leaders for the past 40 years, so that's lent some stability to how Cambodia conducts its foreign policy and specifically its relationship with Thailand. So other than this dispute, generally these are two neighbors that have gotten along well.
Yes, Ross Feingold, do stay with us as we have further updates coming out of the Indo-Pacific, but of course on NewsX World we will continue to cover the Thai-Cambodia conflict as things develop. We now move on, and the Philippine Coast Guard says that 3 Filipino fishermen had been wounded and 2 fishing vessels suffered significant damage when Chinese Coast Guard's ships fired water cannons in a disputed South China Sea shoal. Video released by the Philippine Coast Guard showed Chinese Coast Guard boats surrounding and spraying water onto a Filipino fishing boat. China's embassy in Manila has not immediately responded to a request for comment outside office hours. Although China's Coast Guard says it has driven away multiple Philippine vessels and taken control measures. China claims almost the entire South China Sea, a waterway carrying more than $3 trillion of annual commerce. The areas, it claims, cut into the exclusive economic zones of Brunei, Indonesia, Malaysia, the Philippines and Vietnam. Ross Feingold joins us once again. The Philippines says these fishermen were injured and boats damaged by this water cannon. Do you think Beijing here is testing the limits of Philippine security, the security around the South China Sea area? And how would you describe this action? It's not very frequent that people are actually injured by China driving away boats out of the South China Sea.
Physical injury to sailors might not be as frequent, but these incidents are very frequent where ships from the two sides are coming close together. Sometimes there's ramming. The Philippine side typically will say the fault is of the Chinese side for encroaching on Filipino waters, and the Chinese side will say the opposite. There's back and forth allegations about the seamanship of the captains of the respective vessels as well, but this is just the latest in a large number of similar incidents between the two sides, and it doesn't seem like there's really a way out. They have this competing sovereignty claim. The Philippines is broadly supported by many of its neighbors and many countries in the international community. There's very few people or governments in this region, even if they don't want to challenge China and they want to maintain a good relationship with China, very few people are saying, well, China's correct and the Philippines is wrong. And then the Philippines, of course, has its relationship with the United States. They're treaty allies, and the Philippines' military relationship with Japan and Australia is becoming closer as well. What will be really interesting to watch here is the U.S. reaction. Now, the U.S. has been accused of a less than enthusiastic reaction in support of Japan over the last 4 or 5 weeks in the dispute between China and Japan after Prime Minister Takaichi's comments about Taiwan. So it'll be interesting to see what kind of statements of support for the Philippines are made by U.S. government spokespeople.
Ross, of course, as you've said, this is a repeated instance. China, of course, sees the whole South China Sea as its own, and using this technique of these water cannons and driving boats out of the internationally recognized international waters pretty frequently. However, what point does this non-lethal force become a clear act of aggression under international law?
It's something that's totally open to interpretation. Just like any legal question, you could have 10 lawyers and you're going to get 10 different opinions. So many people will say that, well, despite what international law might say, might make right here, as unfortunate as that is. And the reality is that China has an enormous naval and Coast Guard capability that is very difficult for the Philippines to match. They have a much smaller number of ships. Their ships are not as capable as the Chinese ships, and that is a significant challenge for the Philippines. They're trying to invest more, but they're not really there yet. And again, it also comes back to the question of what kind of support will the international community and its close allies like the United States provide. That really will be a significant factor if the Philippines wants to enforce its claims. And also keep in mind, we have this arbitration decision from 2016, which China did not participate in and doesn't recognize. So you want to talk about international law, you could say, well, it's very nice that there are these forums and they issue arbitral awards. But if one side didn't participate in the process and ignores the result, we're really back to the use of force.
Yeah, and Ross, and finally, over $3 trillion worth in annual global trade passes through these waters. Do you think the world is underreacting to what is effectively a slow motion militarization of the South China Sea?
We do see more countries sailing through the waters. They say it's in support of keeping them open to international commerce. There was discussion about this issue in the newly released national security strategy by the Trump administration a little over a week ago as well. So the international community is certainly paying attention to this. Then it becomes a question of, are you just going to sail through there once a year, and referring to, say, some of the European countries, or are you going to have a more permanent presence, which will, of course, invite a Chinese reaction. But if you really do want to counter them, then you have to be there more than once or twice a year.
Ross Feingold, thank you very much for taking the time and joining us. It's always a pleasure to have you. We now move on. We stay in the region, and Myanmar's military junta has denied killing any civilians in a recently conducted hospital strike, which, as per local reports, killed more than 30. A military jet bombed the General Hospital of Marayu in the Rakhine state of Myanmar on Wednesday earlier this week. According to a state-run media outlet, the people killed or injured in the strikes were not civilians, but only terrorists and their supporters. The United Nations has demanded an investigation into the incident, saying that the attack could be considered a potential war crime. Additionally, the WHO chief has said that several health workers and patients were killed in the hospital attack, and that the building, along with its operating rooms, were severely damaged. Arakan Army, a ethnic minority separatist force active in the region, reported that 76 people were also wounded in the strike. Tens of thousands of people are fleeing rising floodwaters in western Washington as the Skagit River reaches record highs, putting levees at risk. Days of torrential rain have swelled rivers to record or near record levels as flooding has stranded families and rooftops, washed over bridges and ripped homes from their foundations. Burlington was placed under a full evacuation order, with people told to leave immediately and move to higher ground. National Guard troops and sheriff's deputies were going door to assist the evacuations. Some responders were seen paddling stranded Burlington residents to safety in inflatable river rafts through the muddy floodwaters. Abbotsford, a city in Canada bordering the United States, has also been severely injured by the flooding. Listen in to what a resident had to say on the issue.
But like coming down here and seeing all this water, it's horrible, and I know about all the people being evacuated, and it's just really sad to see. Just seeing all the houses affected, it was pretty jarring to see. Not to mention the water's freezing cold. I just wish Abbotsford was more prepared.
And that's a wrap for this hour. Keep watching NewsX World for more international news updates.
What we can do as the Interparliamentary Union to strengthen democracy, to promote human rights, to ensure that humanitarian law is respected.
UN Security Council needs a makeover, a comprehensive reform, and India deserves a position there, a role there.
Prime Minister Modi during Operation Sindoor made it amply clear that war has never been India's choice. We are with the side of peace. We are neither neutral nor indifferent. We are with peace.
We would have dealt with US a whole lot on trade and those kinds of things, and that's not as certain these days. So we have to go back and look at our European partners, our Asian partners.
An opportunity to exchange, to have a dialogue, to have a debate on a different perspective on finding the solution of the conflict.
First thing that is important to have a common ground, and that we do have with humanitarian law.
Hello and welcome, I'm Thomas Porteous and you're watching the World Report on NewsX World. Let's take a look at some of the top headlines of the hour. 2 people are killed and 8 others critically wounded in a shooting at Brown University, according to local officials. Authorities say the gunman remains at large as the investigation continues. 2 US soldiers and a civilian interpreter are killed in Syria after a suspected Islamic State attack on a convoy, US officials have said. The US military says 3 other American troops are wounded and the attacker is shot dead. UN Secretary-General Antonio Guterres condemns a horrific drone attack on Bangladeshi peacekeepers in Sudan that kills 6 and wounds 6 others. Guterres warns that such attacks may constitute war crimes and says those responsible must be held accountable. EU Commission President Ursula von der Leyen welcomes the release of Belarusian opposition figures and political prisoners by authorities in Minsk. She says the move should strengthen efforts to free all remaining detainees and keep pressure on Belarus over human rights. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky says he will meet US and European representatives in Berlin to discuss the fundamentals of peace. He says Ukraine needs a dignified peace and guarantees that Russia will not attack again as Germany hosts ceasefire talks ahead of a leaders' summit. Police clash with youths for a second night in Tunisia's city of Kariun after a man dies following a police chase, according to his family. The unrest comes as tensions rise ahead of the anniversary of the 2011 revolution and calls for a nationwide strike. Thailand's caretaker Prime Minister says there is no ceasefire with Cambodia and the military will continue operations along the disputed border. The statement comes after calls from Malaysia and a US claim of a truce, which both Thai and Cambodian leaders did not confirm. China's Foreign Minister Wang Yi says Beijing is ready to push its comprehensive strategic partnership with the United Arab Emirates to a higher level. Wang cites aligned development goals and strong economic complementary with talks with the UAE's foreign minister. We start this hour in the United States, and 2 people have been killed and several more critically injured in a shooting at Brown University in Providence, Rhode Island, after a man dressed in black opened fire on the first-floor classroom of the Barus and Holy building, which houses the engineering and physics departments. Mayor Brett Smiley says that police are still searching for the shooter who struck at Brown's Barus and Holy Engineering building, where exams were taking place at the time. Let's have a look at what the mayor had to say on the incident.
Today is a day that the city of Providence and the state of Rhode Island prayed would never come. We've heard about horrific acts of gun violence and active shooter situations in other places, but not here. But this afternoon at 4 o'clock in the afternoon, we received a call. 4:05 was when the initial call came in to Brown University of a report of an active shooter. I can confirm that there are 2 individuals who have died this afternoon, and there are another 8 in critical status, those stable, at Rhode Island Hospital. Those are the only injuries or casualties that we know at this time. Additionally, we do not have a shooter in custody at this time. There is a shelter in place in effect for the greater Brown University area. If you live on or near Brown's campus, we are encouraging you to stay home and stay inside. If you're not home at this time, we would encourage you not to return to your homes until the shelter in place has been lifted. Brown, Providence, and the FBI are currently in close coordination as they seek to find the shooter or shooters. The shooting took place at the Barris and Holly building, which is a Brown University engineering and physics building. The building contains both classrooms and lab space, too, and so he will be with us at future updates this evening.
Meanwhile, US President Donald Trump, as he returned to the White House from the annual Army-Navy football match, says that he'd been briefed on the situation at Brown University, calling the incident a terrible one. Let's listen in to his statement.
I've been fully briefed on the Brown University situation, what a terrible thing it is. And all we can do right now is pray for the victims and for those that were very badly hurt, it looks like. And we'll inform you later as to what's happening, but it's a shame. It's a shame. Just pray. Thank you very much.
Joining us now is Shruti Dasgupta. She's an international affairs expert and she joins us live from New Delhi. Shruti, as of November the 30th, there were approximately 397 mass shootings nationwide this year. That includes where 4+ people were shot in a single event. This one, however, of course, happened in a place of education. How likely is this incident likely to reignite calls for federal gun reform?
Greetings, Thomas. Thank you so much for inviting me. What I understand is that data shows that unfortunately, despite 300 plus events, almost, if we include this one, 400 events of mass shootings and injury or death caused by it, that is still a 20-year low for USA. That means it peaked at around, I think, 22, 23 post-pandemic, where the mental state of a lot of people was not very balanced. And now it's coming down to what they call regression to mean, as in what is the average that they can expect. It is down from last year's also. Last year, I believe it was, I think, 600 odd events. Please do correct me if I'm wrong in these stats. What is alarming is also that it doesn't just occur in one particular state or ideology based in terms of red or blue states. It is equally balanced. So this basically shows that there is a large illegal arms trafficking network. There is a large psychological problems related issues that USA needs to address before people start calling out for its removal of the Second Amendment, that is the right to bear arms. And although there are, in Rhode Island particularly, they have a lot of measures in place like gun licensing, concealed weapon licensing, a blue card where it is somebody gives an exam whether you're actually fit to carry an arm with you or also or not. But there is none, as we've discussed before, where the psychological mindset of the gun holder is addressed. So, and December being the holiday month where unfortunately all the loonies come out of their bins, tends to be slightly more violent, not just in America, but in a lot of places. So this is what we are seeing. People will now again stand up and say arms should be banned, and there'll be another lobby that will say that arms shouldn't be banned. They are what is protecting us against the people who are carrying illegal arms. So it's a conversation which asks USA to understand that bearing arms is not the problem. The problem is the people who are bearing arms and how and what they use it for.
Of course, Shruti, the United States remains the most powerful country in the world, but by a huge margin, they consistently top the list of mass shootings year on year. From an international lens, how damaging are these repeated mass shootings to America's soft power and moral authority?
Well, USA's moral authority has been put on the block for many other reasons just beyond these mass shootings. The shooting itself does portray to the international audience that USA is a very violent place. People are easily triggered and the rights are not that very well protected of other people, as in the people who are not bearing arms. It also puts a sense of fear in outsiders because the trigger level is so high, you may never know who is going to end up shooting who. These are not gang violences that are happening. What we're talking about is school violences, in this particular case, a university violence. So people feel a little bit of apprehension while trying to understand why USA behaves the way it does. So overall, US citizens are specifically looked at through a lens of people who are highly unstable in terms of their temper levels, and their violence level is always highly ranked up there.
And Trump, of course, we just heard his response. He's called for prayers in regards to this incident. Politically, does that signal restraint or avoidance of the gun control debate?
It's very difficult to have a gun control debate because usually it tends to go towards the Second Amendment, for which maybe presidencies can be lost also. So that is not a conversation any politician, blue or red, would want to have. They would want to, as I said before, they should consider putting additional hurdles in the path of holding arms so that the arms lobby is not disturbed, but at least the loonies don't get their hand on it. And beyond it, they have to address the elephant in the room that there is a very huge illegal arms trafficking business. Ghost guns is an issue. There is the issue of it is being almost 1/4 of what a legal arm would cost because it comes with so many barriers. The legal arm, let's say, is about $2,500. An illegal one would be available for $500. So a huge economy runs on illegal arms. That is what they need to address rather than go after the illegal arms lobby. which of course is going to support the right to hold arms.
And Shruti, Brown University, of course, an Ivy League university, the seventh oldest university in the United States. This suspect, of course, now is, however, still at large in the Rhode Island area. What does this say about the response gaps, even in the elite, well-policed university towns, and the preparations that those institutions have for a situation like this, which, of course, as we've said, reoccurs on a frequent basis?
Well, so Brown University, particularly, the last incident they saw was 2019. So a 5-year gap shows that they have their stopgap arrangement in place. They have their security analysis in place. I believe they sent out immediately after the shooting started, they sent out an alert so that people stayed indoors, avoided, silenced their phones, and tried to find shelter from whoever or how many ever shooters were out there. So they have their security apparatus in place. I would hesitate to critique a university just because there are people who do this, because it's not the only one. There are others that have these kind of issues. There may, just because there's a right to hold arms, there are people who will be allowed to have it after 21 years of age if they have the right licenses. And then, of course, there's the illegal part of it, which nobody can guess. So despite it being sad, and my heart going out to the victims, and our prayers with the people who are injured and are hoping, and the parents who are under a lot of pressure where their children are in an environment which seems unsafe, I do believe that they have the security measures in place. As I said, gun violence, mass shootings is on a decline. It is coming down to regression to mean rather than spiking as it did post-pandemic. So maybe we'll see USA calm down a little. It's just unfortunate that it happened at an Ivy League.
Of course, Shruti, and we've seen the likes of school shootings. Of course, this one happened at a university, but older students. We've seen people mentally ill go into schools, some primary schools even, and open fire. Given the pure tragedy of these crimes, some of those previous ones that I've mentioned, like for example, like Sandy Hook and Columbine, for example, and there's been no international change. Let's also go back to the likes of Dunblane in the United Kingdom, and of course Christchurch in New Zealand. We saw legal action be made by the government after these tragedies happened. Why haven't the United States done the same?
Well, because those societies, those rights, those amendments, they are all different. So they cannot, one model does not work for all nations. And USA is a case of its own. And then there is the state level infrastructure and the federal infrastructure. So there are many hurdles to cross over there. One particular method cannot be for all. Let's just talk about the California shooting that we spoke about last time. And they've still not found who's responsible. The person is at large. So there are, despite it being a highly surveilled state where you have CCTV cameras at every intersection, you have a lot of tech apparatus going for you and your law enforcement agencies, finding justice and delivering it as soon as possible is not always simple. Specifically for USA, because it has a lot of people do bear arms very legally. It's very difficult to find. And there is this, in this particular last year, I found there is this reluctance to give public information of the identity of the person whom they have probably found. They do not want to talk about what kind of weapon was used. So either they are trying to keep people from being violent against a particular community or a particular set of people, or they are trying to not encourage people by stating outright that this particular weapon is the one that is held out in US university. So there's a larger question at bay, how they are handling the situation and how they are responding to it. But mostly for me, I think they do need, apart from a blue card and every other card and every other license, they need a psychologist's license to be issued right along with the right to bear arms, so that a person holding the gun is the one who's able to use it responsibly.
Shruti Dasgupta, thank you very much for joining us here on News X World. It's always a pleasure to talk to you. We do, however, have some breaking news coming in from Rhode Island from that developing story that we've just spoken about. And during a press briefing by the mayor of Providence and president of Brown University, when asked about the classroom scenario of the Brown University where the shooting occurred, the president of the Brown University was utterly clueless about what exactly was happening in the classroom. Let's have a look.
BC when it happened and flew right back, and I'm catching up right now.
President, with all due respect, 6 hours after the shooting, and you said you don't know what was going on in that classroom. How does that happen? Were they taking an exam? Were they meeting for a club?
I don't know. I don't know.
6 hours later, and you're the president, and you don't know.
I do not know.
Well, that's kind of concerning.
BC when it happened and flew right.
We move on next over to West Asia, and 2 US Army soldiers and a civilian interpreter were killed in an attack linked to the Islamic State in central Syria yesterday. The Pentagon said the incident occurred in the historic town of Palmyra, where US forces were supporting counter-terrorism operations. According to US Central Command, the attack was carried out by a lone gunman while American soldiers were conducting a key leader engagement alongside partner forces. 3 additional US soldiers were wounded. The attacker was killed by partner forces at the scene. US officials said initial assessments indicate Islamic State was likely responsible, though the group has not claimed the attack. Local authorities told Reuters the attacker was a member of the Syrian security forces, though authorities say he held no leadership role. President Donald Trump condemned the attack, while the US military said the names of the fallen soldiers will be released after next of kin notifications are completed. Let's take a listen in.
So we mourn the loss of 3 great patriots in Syria. You know how it happened. It was an ambush, terrible. We also have 3 wounded that seem to be doing pretty well. But we mourn the loss. These are 3 great people. And it's just a terrible thing. Syria, by the way, was fighting along with us. The new president of Syria is, as they told me, and I'm not surprised, he's devastated by what happened. This was an ISIS attack on us and Syria. And again, we mourn the loss and we pray for them and their parents and their loved ones. Very, very sad.
Mr. President, will the U.S. retaliate against ISIS?
Yeah, we will.
And will the U.S. forces attack again?
We will retaliate. Thank you very much.
We're now joined by Professor Rohan Gunaratne, an international affairs expert, joining us live from Singapore. Professor Gunaratne, thank you very much for joining us. Does this attack confirm that ISIS does in fact remain operational despite years of US-led counter-terrorism operations?
Thomas, 10 years ago, ISIS was the world's most strongest terrorist movement, and its HQ, its headquarters was in Syria and Iraq. ISIS still has remnants in Syria and Iraq, and this particular ISIS attack where Americans were killed was a direct result of the survival and attempts to revive in Syria and Iraq. So what is imperative is for governments to work closely with partner nations in the Middle East to dismantle the ISIS remnant structures. Unfortunately, ISIS has spread to Asia, ISIS has spread to Africa, but still in the heartland where ISIS emerged, there are still cells, networks, and individuals that needs to be targeted and eliminated. So I believe that this is a persistent threat, but it is a threat that governments, by working together, can dismantle so that security can be restored.
Yes, and Trump and the Secretary of Defense, Pete Hegseth, have both vowed retaliation against the attackers. What form is that most likely to take? Targeted strikes, expanded operations, or something else?
US has been training the Syrian security forces to be better equipped and better trained so that they can do that targeting, but US itself conducted the airstrike. US will continue to unilaterally take action against ISIS remnants, but will also capacitate Syria and other governments to fight back. What is important to understand is that this particular terrorist is suspected that he was a former member of the Syrian regime, and it is very likely true because many people from ISIS have been integrated to the Syrian security forces. So there must be a rehabilitation program to replace their ISIS ideology with a mainstream ideology, and that takes time, it takes effort, but I only hope that the Syrian government will change the jihadist ideology of the members of the Syrian security forces that previously served with Hayat Tahrir al-Sham and with ISIS.
And Professor Gunaratne, we've seen the United States remove sanctions on Syria, and we've also seen al-Shara visit the White House, for example. However, of course, there's been sectarian clashes killing hundreds of people, and this is a new escalation when it comes to violence in the country post-Bashar al-Assad. How do you think the United States is now looking at this alliance?
You are very correct, Thomas. What we have seen is that the Shiites or the Alawites, the Druze, the Christians and Kurds are under threat, and thousands have been killed since Ahmad al-Shara became the de facto president of Syria. But this is because the ideology of Ahmad al-Shara needs to transform, and he needs to become a secular leader, not espouse religious extremism. He should totally dismantle the idea of having a Sharia law and make sure that it becomes a peaceful nation by bringing religious exclusivism and extremism. Nothing good will happen to Syria. Of course, the Americans and the Europeans are now realizing that they have to engage Syria intelligently, because if Syria becomes a prosperous nation but is still subscribing to extremism, then of course that prosperity and sustenance will not continue over a long period, and Syria will eventually pose a threat to Israel. So what is important is to get rid of that extremist and exclusivist mindset, especially of having Islamic law, because it has not worked anywhere in the world. So better to have a proper criminal justice and prison system, which is a modern system, and not have that archaic law that will in many ways will destroy Syria from within.
Yes. Professor Gunaratne, do stay with us as we move over to Europe for our next story. Now, the